On a scorching summer day, a man's unexpected actions toward a dog caught the attention of a passerby. He had no idea he was being filmed, but what happened next left everyone questioning his intentions. Was it what it seemed, or was there more to the story than met the eye? The sun bore down relentlessly over Phoenix, Arizona, as yet another scorching summer day began. By early morning, the temperature had already surpassed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the heat radiating off the asphalt shimmered like a mirage. Isabella, a young woman in her late 20s, stepped out of her small house, her golden Labrador, Duke, eagerly following behind her. His tail wagged with excitement, and his tongue hung out in anticipation of the car ride. "All right, Duke," Isabella said with a weary smile, patting him on the head. "Let's go. It's just a quick trip to the hospital. You'll stay in the car, but I promise I won't take long." Isabella wasn't feeling her best that morning. Her energy was low, her head slightly heavy, and a faint unease gnawed at her. She chalked it up to the intense heat and a restless night. Grabbing her keys and Duke's leash, she ushered him into the back seat of her compact sedan. Duke, ever the loyal companion, settled down happily, his tail thumping against the seat. The car's air conditioning roared to life as Isabella started the engine. She took a moment to glance at herself in the rearview mirror, noticing the pale sheen of sweat forming on her forehead. She dismissed it with a sigh, focusing instead on backing out of the driveway. The short drive to the hospital was quiet, save for the occasional panting of Duke, who eagerly gazed out the window. His golden-yellow coat shimmered under the sunlight as he stuck his nose out through the small crack Isabella had left for ventilation. The breeze tousled his ears, and he gave a soft, contented whine. Isabella, however, was less enthusiastic. She kept adjusting her grip on the steering wheel, her palms slick with sweat. A creeping dizziness began to cloud her thoughts, but she pressed on, determined to complete her health checkup quickly and return home to rest. Arriving at the hospital, Isabella immediately faced a challenge. The parking lot was packed, with rows of cars glinting under the relentless sun. She circled the lot, frustration growing as she struggled to find an open space. After several minutes, she spotted a narrow spot at the far corner of the lot, partially shaded by a row of towering SUVs. "Finally," she muttered under her breath, maneuvering her car into the tight space. The heat seemed to intensify as she turned off the engine, and the once refreshing blast of air conditioning ceased abruptly. Isabella turned to Duke, who looked at her expectantly, his tongue still lolling out of his mouth. "Stay here, boy. I'll leave the window cracked for you," she said, fumbling with the controls. Her hand, shaky from fatigue, accidentally caused the window to jam part way. The gap she left for ventilation was smaller than she intended, but she was too tired to notice the problem. She reached back to adjust Duke's water bowl, ensuring it was within his reach. "I'll be back before you know it," she said with a faint smile, giving him a gentle pat before grabbing her bag and stepping out of the car. The moment Isabella left the car, the oppressive heat hit her like a physical blow. The sun was unrelenting, and the asphalt beneath her feet radiated a stifling warmth. She pressed a hand to her forehead, shielding her eyes from the glaring light as she made her way toward the hospital entrance. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her breathing grew shallow, and her vision blurred slightly. Sweat trickled down her back as the world around her seemed to blur into a haze of heat. Isabella's legs wobbled as she neared the sliding glass doors of the hospital. The cool, air-conditioned interior was just a few steps away, but her body gave out before she could reach it. A wave of dizziness overtook her, and she crumpled to the ground just outside the entrance. Nearby staff and patients reacted quickly. A nurse and a security guard rushed to her side, lifting her onto a wheelchair and wheeling her into the emergency room. The commotion drew the attention of a few passers-by, but none gave a second thought to the distant car parked in the far corner of the lot. Inside the car, Duke remained blissfully unaware of Isabella's plight. The golden Labrador lay comfortably at first, his tail flicking lazily as he waited for her to return. The small crack in the window allowed a faint breeze to enter, but it did little to combat the rapidly climbing temperature inside the vehicle. Minutes ticked by. The sun continued its merciless assault, and the interior of the car became a stifling oven. Duke shifted uncomfortably, his panting growing heavier as the heat intensified. He nosed the partially opened window, pawing at it in an attempt to find relief, but the small gap offered no escape from the oppressive warmth. The location of the car, tucked away in the far corner of the lot, made it easy to overlook. Shielded by the towering SUVs on either side, Duke's small movements went unnoticed. The few people walking through the lot were preoccupied, hurrying to escape the heat themselves. No one paused to look at the small sedan with its loyal occupant trapped inside. Duke, ever patient and trusting, lay back down, his energy waning. His once enthusiastic panting slowed, and his eyes, usually bright and alert, began to dull with exhaustion. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as the golden Labrador, unaware of the danger he faced, waited faithfully for Isabella to return. Inside the hospital, Isabella was receiving care, her fainting spell attributed to heat exhaustion and dehydration. Nurses moved quickly to stabilize her, unaware that her loyal companion was fighting his own battle mere yards away. The parking lot remained bustling with activity, but none of the passing strangers noticed the growing crisis unfolding in the far corner. The heat inside the car climbed steadily, the temperature soaring well beyond what Duke's body could endure. The morning had begun like any other, yet now, as the clock ticked on, a loyal dog's life hung precariously in the balance, waiting for someone to notice. Inside the parked car, the temperature rose with alarming speed. What had been a tolerable 100 degrees Fahrenheit just moments ago was now creeping toward 120 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the small sedan into an oppressive oven. The air grew thick and stifling, and every surface within the vehicle radiated unbearable heat. Duke, the ever-loyal Labrador, lay on the back seat, his bright, golden-yellow coat glistening with the sweat and moisture beginning to accumulate. He panted heavily, his pink tongue lolling out in an effort to cool himself. The small crack in the window Isabella had left for ventilation was no match for the intensity of the Phoenix sun. The faint breeze that seeped in did little to alleviate the suffocating atmosphere inside. At first, Duke tried to stay calm. He shifted his position, moving from one side of the seat to the other, seeking any patch of shade or coolness. But there was none to be found. The heat enveloped every corner of the car, seeping into the fabric of the seats and the steering wheel, which now felt like it could burn to the touch. Duke moved to the window, pressing his nose against the small gap. His breaths came in short, rapid bursts as he tried to take in the warm air trickling through. With a low whimper, he pawed at the glass, his claws tapping against the unyielding surface. The sound was faint and went unheard in the noisy parking lot outside. The battle against the heat was relentless and unforgiving. The water bowl Isabella had placed within Duke's reach sat untouched, its contents warming quickly under the oppressive conditions. Duke nosed at it, but the tepid water offered no comfort. He licked his lips, his body instinctively trying to retain what little moisture remained. But the signs of dehydration were already setting in. His once bright eyes began to dull, and his energy waned. Duke's movements slowed as his body struggled to regulate its temperature. Despite the growing lethargy, a flicker of hope lingered in his gaze as he looked toward the door. His loyalty to Isabella kept him waiting patiently, trusting that she would return at any moment to take him back to safety. The car's location, hidden in the far corner of the lot and flanked by towering SUVs, proved to be both a blessing and a curse. The shade from the larger vehicles delayed the temperature rise by a few precious minutes, but it also shielded Duke from the view of passers-by. The parking lot, bustling with activity, was filled with people focused on their own tasks, hurrying to escape the sweltering heat. No one noticed the small sedan or the Labrador within it. The faint tapping of Duke's claws against the glass and his weak whimpers were drowned out by the sounds of car engines and hurried footsteps. The loyal dog's silent struggle went unnoticed. Inside the car, the temperature soared above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air became nearly unbreathable, thick with the heat that seemed to press down on Duke's chest like an invisible weight. His panting slowed, each breath becoming more labored. His body was losing the fight against dehydration and heat exhaustion, and his movements became feeble and uncoordinated. Duke shifted once more, his legs trembling as he tried to stand. He pressed his paws against the window, but the glass was now scorching to the touch. Letting out a faint, mournful whimper, Duke collapsed onto the seat, his golden fur damp with sweat. His once bright eyes closed halfway as exhaustion overcame him. The parking lot remained indifferent to Duke's plight. A security guard made his rounds, glancing casually at the rows of cars, but failing to notice the Labrador's fading strength. A mother hurried past with her child, shielding the little one's face from the sun with her hand. A man in a suit jogged towards the hospital entrance, his briefcase swinging at his side. Life went on, oblivious to the silent crisis unfolding in the far corner of the lot. Inside the hospital, Isabella lay unconscious, recovering from her own battle with the heat. Nurses tended to her, unaware of the desperate fight for survival taking place just a few yards away. The world continued to move, blind to the loyal dog's suffering. In the suffocating heat of the car, Duke's thoughts, if they could be called that, turned instinctively toward survival. His breathing, shallow and erratic, betrayed his body's struggle to cool itself. Yet, despite the unbearable conditions, there was no anger, no resentment. Duke's loyalty to Isabella remained unshaken. Even as his strength ebbed away, he waited for her return, trusting her implicitly. The Labrador's gentle nature and unwavering faith in his owner were a testament to the bond they shared. But in this moment, that bond was being tested in the most harrowing way imaginable. As the clock ticked on, the temperature inside the car climbed even higher. Duke's once steady panting had slowed to faint, ragged gasps. His body lay motionless, save for the occasional twitch of his ears or tail. The once energetic Labrador, who had bounded into the car with such enthusiasm that morning, now seemed like a shadow of himself. The sun beat down mercilessly on the small sedan, and the air shimmered with heat waves. Inside, Duke's struggle continued, silent and unnoticed. His life hung by a thread, dependent on an intervention that had yet to come. The scene in the parking lot was one of stark contrasts, the bustling activity of the hospital entrance versus the stillness of the far corner where Duke's car was parked. Time seemed to move differently in these two worlds. In one, people rushed about, their lives filled with purpose and urgency. In the other, a loyal dog fought a quiet, desperate battle against the elements. Duke's life now hinged on a fragile balance, on the hope that someone would notice, that someone would care enough to act. But as the minutes ticked by, the possibility of rescue seemed to grow more distant. Unbeknownst to anyone in the parking lot, Duke's condition had reached a critical point. The Labrador lay sprawled across the seat, his breaths faint and uneven. His once vibrant golden coat was now matted with sweat, and his body felt heavy and unresponsive. He was no longer the lively, curious companion who had joyfully wagged his tail just hours earlier. The car, once a place of comfort and security, had become a deadly trap. The heat showed no mercy, and Duke's loyalty, though steadfast, was not enough to save him from the relentless onslaught of the sun. As the morning dragged on, the parking lot began to empty out slightly, with a few cars pulling away to make room for others. But Duke's car remained, unmoving, a silent witness to the unforgiving summer day. The Labrador's life teetered on the edge, his fate resting in the hands of an unseen savior who had yet to arrive. The chapter closed with a heavy sense of anticipation leaving Duke's struggle unresolved and the reader waiting anxiously for what might come next. Would someone notice the small sedan in the corner? Would Duke's loyal patience be rewarded with rescue? Or would the silent car become a symbol of a tragedy that could have been prevented? The answers lay just out of reach, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The sun bore down relentlessly, baking the asphalt of the hospital parking lot. Joseph shuffled along the rows of cars, his steps unhurried but purposeful. His life as a drifter around the hospital grounds was often one of quiet observation, watching the comings and goings of others, lending a hand when needed, and finding moments of stillness to reflect on his own journey. On this particular day, as the temperature climbed higher, Joseph's usual routine was interrupted by a sound that didn't belong. It was faint and weak, but it stopped him in his tracks. A whimper, barely audible over the hum of distant engines and the buzz of cicadas. He turned his head toward the sound, scanning the rows of cars until his eyes settled on a small sedan parked at the far corner of the lot. Squinting, he moved closer, noticing the dog slumped in the back seat. Joseph's heart sank as he reached the car. Through the window, he could see a golden Labrador lying motionless, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Its fur was damp with sweat, and its once bright eyes were half closed, dulled by exhaustion. "Hang in there, buddy," Joseph muttered, placing his hands on the car's doorframe. The metal burned his palms, and he instinctively pulled back with a wince. The heat radiating from the car was unbearable, and the dog's condition made it clear that time was running out. Joseph knocked on the window, his voice urgent but calm. "Hey, can you hear me? Stay with me, okay?" The dog's ears twitched faintly in response, but its body remained limp. Reaching into his pocket, Joseph pulled out his battered old cell phone. It was a lifeline he rarely used, reserved for emergencies like this. Dialing 911, he quickly explained the situation to the dispatcher. "There's a dog locked in a car at the hospital parking lot," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "It's in bad shape. I don't think it has much time left." The dispatcher assured him that help was on the way, but as Joseph glanced back at the dog, he knew waiting wasn't an option. Every second counted. Joseph looked up at the cloudless sky, the sun's rays piercing down with unrelenting intensity. "God, give me strength," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He didn't have much, but he had his hands, his wits, and his faith. He turned and hurried toward the small cluster of trees where he had stashed his belongings, a worn backpack filled with the essentials of his life. Digging through the bag, he pulled out a rusty metal rod he had found weeks ago, its surface pitted and scratched but still sturdy. Clutching the rod tightly, Joseph jogged back to the car, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He could feel the sweat dripping down his face, but he didn't stop to wipe it away. Back at the car, Joseph hesitated for only a moment. He tapped on the glass again, his voice soft but firm. "I'm going to get you out of there. Just hold on." Raising the rod, he aimed for the corner of the rear passenger window and struck it with all his strength. The first hit sent a spider web of cracks racing across the glass. Encouraged, he struck again and again until the window shattered into jagged shards. The sound echoed through the parking lot, drawing the attention of a passerby walking nearby. The person paused, their curiosity piqued, and pulled out a phone to record what was happening. Joseph carefully reached through the broken window, avoiding the sharp edges of the glass. The heat that escaped from the car felt like an oven blast, almost forcing him to step back. Gritting his teeth, he unlatched the door and swung it open. The Labrador lay sprawled across the seat, its body frighteningly still. Joseph leaned in, gently scooping the dog into his arms. Duke's golden fur was damp and hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and labored. "It's okay, boy. I've got you," Joseph whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As he carried Duke away from the car, the passerby continued to film, capturing the scene in vivid detail. The sweat-soaked man cradling the limp dog, the shattered glass glinting on the asphalt, and the quiet urgency of Joseph's every movement. Joseph found a patch of shade under a nearby tree and laid Duke gently on the grass. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small bottle of water, pouring it over the dog's head and ears to cool him down. Carefully, he trickled some water into Duke's mouth, urging him to drink. "Come on, buddy," Joseph said softly. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." For a moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, Duke's chest rose in a steadier rhythm. His eyes fluttered open just a fraction, and his tail gave the faintest of twitches. Joseph let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced upward, whispering, "Thank you." The passerby approached cautiously, phone still in hand. "Hey," they said, their voice filled with awe. "Are you okay? That was incredible." Joseph looked up, surprised by the attention. "I'm fine," he replied simply, brushing the glass dust off his hands. "He's the one who needs help." The person nodded, lowering their phone. "You just saved that dog's life," they said. "I'm sharing this. People need to see what you did." Joseph shook his head modestly. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about doing what's right." As Joseph stood by Duke's side, keeping a watchful eye on the dog's fragile state, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Help was on its way, but in that moment, Joseph had already become the dog's hero, a man who, despite his own struggles, had chosen to act with courage and compassion. The passerby's video would soon capture the hearts of many, but for Joseph, it wasn't about recognition. It was about a quiet, unshakable belief that every life, no matter how small, deserved a chance to be saved. Joseph's hands trembled slightly as he cradled Duke's limp body and carried him to a small patch of shade beneath a nearby tree. The dog's fur was hot and damp against his arms, and Duke's shallow breathing worried him deeply. Time was slipping away, and Joseph knew every second mattered. Gently laying Duke on the cool grass, Joseph reached into his backpack and pulled out the only water bottle he had. His life on the streets had taught him to ration his supplies carefully, but in this moment there was no hesitation. Joseph unscrewed the bottle's cap and began pouring the water over Duke's head and neck, letting the cool liquid trickle down and soak into the dog's fur. He used his hands to massage Duke's ears and belly, the key areas where heat could be released. "Stay with me, boy," Joseph murmured, his voice calm but firm. He worked methodically, even as sweat dripped down his own face from the relentless sun overhead. Duke gave a weak twitch in response, his body slightly recoiling from the touch of the cold water. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel Joseph's determination. He poured a small amount of water into his cupped hand and brought it to Duke's mouth, coaxing him to drink. The dog's tongue flicked out slowly, lapping at the water. "That's it," Joseph whispered. "You're doing great." Nearby, the passerby who had been filming the rescue put away their phone and stepped closer. "Is there anything else I can do to help?" they asked, their voice filled with urgency. Joseph glanced up briefly, his face glistening with sweat. "Can you get someone from the hospital?" he asked. "A security guard or anyone who can bring more supplies. He's still in bad shape." The passerby nodded and hurried toward the hospital entrance. As they disappeared into the distance, Joseph turned his attention back to Duke. The small patch of shade under the tree offered some respite from the heat, but Joseph knew it wouldn't be enough. He kept massaging Duke's ears and pouring the last few drops of water onto his fur. Slowly, Duke's breathing began to stabilize. His chest rose and fell in a more regular rhythm, and his eyes fluttered open slightly. A faint wag of his tail followed, weak but unmistakable. Joseph smiled faintly, his shoulders sagging with relief. "There you go," he said softly. "You're not done yet, buddy. You've got more fight in you." A few minutes later, the passerby returned with a hospital security guard in tow. The guard carried a small, portable fan, its blades whirring quietly as he set it up beside Duke. The cool breeze from the fan provided an immediate difference, helping to lower the dog's body temperature further. "You've done a lot already," the guard said, nodding toward Joseph. "Let's keep him cool until the animal rescue team gets here." Joseph nodded, his hands never leaving Duke's side. He continued to stroke the dog's fur and whisper words of encouragement. Meanwhile, the passerby retrieved their phone and began sharing the footage they had captured earlier. The video showed every moment of Joseph's rescue, the sweat dripping from his brow, the desperation in his movements as he shattered the car's window, and the care with which he carried Duke to safety. The video was captioned, "A homeless man saved this dog's life today. We need more people like him in the world." As it made its way onto social media, the clip quickly gained traction. Comments flooded in, praising Joseph's selflessness. "This man is an angel. Let's find him and help him too. Heroes don't wear capes. They carry water bottles and rusty tools. What an incredible act of kindness. This man deserves recognition." Back at the scene, the small crowd that had gathered watched in admiration as Joseph continued his care for Duke. The security guard occasionally radioed updates, ensuring that help was on the way. "He's lucky you were here," the guard remarked. "Most people wouldn't have noticed or cared enough to act." Joseph shrugged slightly, his gaze fixed on Duke. "It wasn't about luck," he said quietly. "It was just what had to be done." The guard gave him a long look but said nothing, sensing the humility behind Joseph's words. Duke's condition had improved, but he was far from fully recovered. Joseph stayed by his side, his hand resting gently on the dog's back as the fan continued to circulate cooler air. He didn't notice the way the crowd watched him with quiet admiration, nor did he realize the impact of the video already spreading online. For Joseph, the only thing that mattered was that Duke was breathing, that he had another chance. As sirens echoed in the distance, signaling the arrival of animal rescue, Joseph allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He looked at Duke, who had opened his eyes fully now, and gave the dog a reassuring pat. "You're going to be okay," he said softly. "You've got people looking out for you now." Duke's tail wagged faintly again, and Joseph felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat. In that moment, the connection between man and dog transcended words, a silent understanding of gratitude, trust, and hope. Joseph had no idea that his actions had already begun to spark change far beyond the parking lot. The video, shared and reshared, had reached hundreds of people within minutes, touching hearts and inspiring calls for action. But for now, Joseph stayed in the moment, focused solely on Duke's recovery. He didn't seek recognition or reward. For him, this was simply the right thing to do, the act of compassion that his heart and perhaps God had guided him to. The sirens grew louder, signaling the next step in Duke's journey. But for Joseph, this chapter was closing with a quiet prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for Duke's survival, for the chance to help, and for the fleeting sense of purpose that made every struggle worthwhile. The sterile white walls of the emergency room swam into focus as Isabella blinked her eyes open. The harsh fluorescent lights above her felt blinding, and her body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and confusion. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. A nurse's face appeared above her, kind and calm. "Good, you're awake," the nurse said gently. "You fainted from heat exhaustion, but you're stable now." Isabella tried to sit up, her head pounding. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse and weak. "You collapsed just outside the hospital," the nurse explained. "We brought you inside and got you rehydrated. It seems the heat got to you." As the nurse spoke, a memory came rushing back to Isabella, a memory that hit her like a bolt of lightning. Duke, her dog, was still in the car. Isabella's eyes widened in panic as she struggled to sit up fully. "My dog!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Duke! He's in the car! I left him there!" The nurse placed a reassuring hand on Isabella's shoulder, gently easing her back onto the bed. "Calm down," she said soothingly. "Someone found your dog and rescued him. He's safe now." Isabella's heart clenched. Relief mixed with guilt washed over her, making her throat tighten. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's outside in the parking lot," the nurse said. "A man helped him and kept him cool until help arrived. He's weak, but he's alive." Isabella swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the nurse's protests. Her body felt weak, and her legs wobbled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand. She couldn't wait any longer. "I need to see him," Isabella said, determination burning in her eyes. The nurse, seeing the urgency in her expression, reluctantly helped her navigate through the hallways. Each step felt like an eternity as Isabella's mind raced with thoughts of Duke, his gentle eyes, his wagging tail, his unwavering loyalty. She had left him behind in the worst circumstances, and the thought tore at her heart. As Isabella approached the parking lot, she saw a small crowd gathered near the far corner. Her pace quickened, fueled by a mix of fear and hope, until she finally reached the scene. Her eyes immediately fell on Duke, lying under the shade of a tree. He looked weak, his golden fur damp and his eyes half closed, but his chest rose and fell steadily. Beside him sat a man in worn clothes, his face weathered but kind, gently stroking Duke's head. The sight of Joseph sitting with her dog brought Isabella to her knees. She collapsed beside Duke, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch him. "Duke!" she whispered, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. Joseph looked up, his expression calm but tired. "You must be his owner," he said quietly. "He's been through a lot, but he's a fighter. He's going to be okay." Isabella couldn't contain her emotions any longer. She placed her hands on Duke's damp fur, stroking him gently as sobs shook her shoulders. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I should have never left you. I didn't mean to. I didn't know the window was stuck. Her words tumbled out in broken fragments, but Duke, ever forgiving, seemed to understand. Though weak, his tail gave a faint wag, and he let out a soft, reassuring whimper. The simple gesture brought a fresh wave of tears to Isabella's eyes. "You're too good for me, Duke," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and guilt. Isabella turned to Joseph, her tear-streaked face filled with emotion. "You saved him," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Joseph shrugged modestly, his hands resting on his knees. "I just did what anyone should do," he said simply. He was in trouble, and he needed help. But Isabella shook her head. "No," she insisted, her voice firm. "Not everyone would have done what you did. You saved his life." She reached out and placed her hand over Joseph's, squeezing it gently. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Joseph hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "Just take care of him. That's all that matters." For a moment, the three of them sat in silence. Isabella, Joseph, and Duke. The small crowd that had gathered earlier began to disperse, but Isabella remained by Duke's side, her hand never leaving his fur. The nurse who had accompanied Isabella finally spoke. "We'll need to get him checked out by a vet, just to make sure he's fully stable," she said. Isabella nodded. "Of course," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll do whatever it takes." Joseph stood, brushing the dust from his clothes. "If you need me to help carry him, just let me know," he offered. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've already done so much," she said. "But I wouldn't mind if you stayed. Duke seems to trust you." Joseph smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay." As Isabella watched Duke's tail wag faintly again, a sense of peace washed over her. She still felt the weight of her mistake, but the overwhelming relief of seeing her dog alive and knowing he was in good hands gave her hope. She looked at Joseph, her heart full of gratitude for the stranger who had stepped in when she couldn't. In that moment, She realized that compassion and kindness could come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes those who had the least to give were the ones who gave the most. And as the sun began its slow descent over the parking lot, casting long shadows across the ground, Isabella whispered a silent prayer of thanks for Duke's survival, for Joseph's selflessness, and for the second chances life had granted them all. The video of Joseph's heroic rescue began its journey on social media with a simple caption, "A homeless man saves a dog trapped in a scorching car. True kindness still exists." The clip, just a few minutes long, captured every raw and powerful detail. Joseph breaking the car window, cradling the limp Labrador in his arms, and working tirelessly to save Duke's life. The video didn't just show a rescue. It told a story of selflessness and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Within hours, the video went viral, reaching thousands, and by the next day, it had been viewed by millions. Comments began pouring in from people around the world, each one echoing the same sentiment: admiration and gratitude for Joseph's act of kindness. "This man is a true hero. We need more people like him. How can we help? Someone give him a job. He's clearly got the biggest heart." The world needs more stories like this. As the video spread, journalists picked up the story. Local news stations aired segments about the rescue, featuring clips from the video and interviews with those who had witnessed it. One reporter managed to find Isabella, who recounted her overwhelming gratitude for Joseph. "He didn't hesitate," Isabella told the reporter, her voice trembling with emotion. "He saved Duke's life without asking for anything in return. He's a better person than most people I know." As the story gained traction, people began asking questions about Joseph. Who was this man who had risked so much to save a dog? And why was he living on the streets? It didn't take long for someone to uncover Joseph's circumstances. A local resident who recognized him from the video shared that Joseph had been homeless for years, living a quiet and solitary life around the hospital. Despite his hardships, he was known for his kindness, offering help to strangers, cleaning up litter, and even sharing what little he had with others in need. The revelation only deepened the admiration for Joseph. People couldn't reconcile how someone who had so little could give so much. Inspired by Joseph's story, viewers began to take action. A GoFundMe campaign was launched with the goal of providing him with the resources he needed to rebuild his life. The campaign's description read, "Joseph saved a dog's life without hesitation. Now it's time for us to save his. Let's give him the second chance he deserves." Within days, the campaign exceeded its modest goal of $10,000, raising tens of thousands of dollars instead. Donations poured in from across the globe, accompanied by heartfelt messages. "You're a hero, Joseph. Thank you for reminding us of the power of kindness. This is for you and Duke. May you both find the peace and happiness you deserve. Your selflessness inspires me. God bless you." Amid the outpouring of support, a local non-profit organization dedicated to helping the homeless reached out to Joseph. They offered him temporary housing and assistance with securing a stable job. When Joseph was informed of the offers, he was overwhelmed. "I didn't do it for attention or reward," he said humbly when approached by a reporter. "I just saw someone, or something, that needed help, and I did what I could, that's all." Despite his modesty, Joseph accepted the help. The non-profit arranged for him to stay in a small apartment, complete with basic amenities and a stocked pantry. For the first time in years, Joseph had a bed to sleep in, a roof over his head, and the dignity of stability. Among the many job offers Joseph received, one stood out: a position at a local animal rescue center. The organization, having seen his compassion for Duke, believed Joseph's kind heart and patient demeanor made him perfect for the role. When Joseph arrived for his first day at the rescue center, he was greeted warmly by the staff. "We've heard so much about you," the director said, shaking his hand. "We're lucky to have you here." Joseph's work at the center involved caring for abandoned and injured animals, a task that brought him immense joy and fulfillment. He often thought of Duke as he tended to the dogs, remembering how one act of kindness had set his life on a new path. Joseph's transformation wasn't just a personal victory, it became a symbol of what could happen when a community came together. The support he received reminded people of the power of unity, empathy, and action. Isabella, still deeply grateful, stayed in touch with Joseph. She often visited him at the rescue center, bringing Duke along to see the man who had saved his life. Duke, now fully recovered, always greeted Joseph with a wagging tail and a happy bark, as if to say, "Thank you." Though Joseph had never sought recognition, he couldn't help but marvel at how his life had changed. He believed that everything that had happened, the timing, the people who stepped in to help, was no coincidence. "I think God works in mysterious ways," he said during an interview. "Sometimes you're put in a situation not because you're strong, but because you need to be reminded that you're not alone. This wasn't just about me saving Duke, it was about Duke saving me too." The video that started it all continued to inspire people long after Joseph's story had reached its happy conclusion. Animal rescue groups reported an increase in donations and adoptions, and awareness about the dangers of leaving pets in hot cars grew significantly. As for Joseph, he remained steadfast in his belief that kindness was its own reward. Every day at the rescue center, he carried with him the memory of that scorching summer day, the day a dog named Duke, and a humble man with little to his name, reminded the world that compassion could change everything. And so, Joseph's story became more than just a viral moment. It became a testament to the enduring power of goodness, proof that even in the hardest of circumstances, small acts of love could ignite change far beyond what anyone could imagine. The summer sun shone warmly over the quiet park, where Duke, now fully recovered, bounded happily through the grass. His golden fur glistened under the soft light, and his wagging tail was a blur of joy as he chased after a ball Isabella had thrown. Watching him, Isabella couldn't help but smile, a deep sense of gratitude filling her heart. Duke's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. From the brink of collapse in the sweltering car to the vibrant, energetic dog he was now, every step of the journey reminded Isabella of the second chance they had both been given. For Isabella, the incident had been a wake-up call. She no longer saw herself as just a pet owner. She now understood the profound responsibility that came with caring for another living being. Determined to turn her experience into something meaningful, Isabella began volunteering at the local animal rescue center, where Joseph now worked. She shared Duke's story with anyone who would listen, emphasizing the dangers of leaving pets in cars during the summer, even for a few minutes. Her efforts didn't stop there. She helped organize educational workshops and created flyers that were distributed throughout the community, raising awareness about the signs of heat stroke in animals and how to respond. "I owe it to Duke," she often said, her voice filled with conviction, "and I owe it to Joseph for showing me what true compassion looks like." Meanwhile, Joseph's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. The rescue center had become more than just a place of work for him. It was a sanctuary where he could connect with animals and people who shared his love for kindness. His modest apartment, provided through the non-profit organization that had reached out to him, became his safe haven. For the first time in years, Joseph had a space he could call home, complete with a soft bed, a warm shower, and a small kitchen where he could prepare his meals. But more than the physical comforts, it was the sense of purpose that truly changed Joseph. Every day he worked tirelessly to care for the animals at the center, his gentle hands and calm demeanor making him a favorite among the staff and the animals alike. He often thought back to that sweltering day in the parking lot, reflecting on how one decision, to help a dog in need, had set off a chain of events that changed not only his life, but the lives of countless others. Joseph's story didn't fade after the initial wave of attention. News outlets continued to follow his journey, sharing updates about his new job and the positive impact he was making at the rescue center. The story became a symbol of hope and redemption, showing that even in the most challenging circumstances, one small act of kindness could create ripples of change. People who had seen the viral video wrote letters to Joseph, thanking him for inspiring them to be better, to do more. "Your actions reminded me that there's still good in the world," one letter read. "Thank you for showing us all what it means to care." Isabella often brought Duke to the rescue center to visit Joseph. The Labrador would sprint toward him the moment they arrived, his tail wagging furiously as if he remembered exactly who had saved him. "You'll always be my hero," Isabella once told Joseph, her eyes filled with gratitude. Joseph chuckled softly, kneeling to pet Duke. "I think he saved me just as much as I saved him," he said, his voice warm with sincerity. Duke's story and Joseph's transformation had a profound effect on the community. Donations to the rescue center surged, enabling the organization to expand its services and save more animals in need. Inspired by Joseph's journey, others in the community began stepping forward to help those who were struggling. Food drives, shelter programs, and mentorship initiatives gained traction, creating a network of support that strengthened bonds among neighbors. The incident in the parking lot became more than just a moment in time. It became a movement of compassion and solidarity. One evening, as Isabella sat on her porch watching Duke play, she reflected on everything that had happened. The guilt she had carried for leaving Duke in the car had slowly transformed into a deep sense of purpose. She knew she could never undo that moment, but she also knew that she could use it to make a difference. Joseph's words from the rescue center echoed in her mind. "It's not about what you've done. It's about what you do next." Joseph's story, Duke's survival, and Isabella's transformation all pointed to one undeniable truth. Small acts of kindness could ripple out in ways no one could predict. A shattered car window had not just saved a life, it had inspired a community and reminded the world of the power of love and compassion. And so, the story ended not with sorrow, but with hope. Duke continued to thrive, Isabella became a voice for change, and Joseph found a second chance, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could always find a way through. This wasn't just the story of a dog, a woman, and a man. It was a story about all of us, a reminder that no matter how small our actions may seem, they can change the world in ways we may never fully understand. And as the sun set on that quiet summer evening, Duke wagged his tail contentedly, Isabella smiled with renewed purpose, and Joseph looked forward to the brighter days ahead. The story of Joseph and Duke reminds us of the profound power of kindness and compassion. Even in the face of hardship, Joseph's selfless act proved that a single moment of love can change lives, not just for the one being helped, but for everyone who witnesses it. Let us take inspiration from Joseph's courage and humility. His faith in doing what's right, even when no one is watching, reminds us to trust in God's plan and to act with love, no matter our circumstances. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to like this video, leave a comment about how it inspired you, and share it with your friends and family. Together, we can spread the message of love, compassion, and faith. May God bless those who bring light into the lives of others, and may we all strive to follow their example. Let's keep the ripple of kindness moving forward, because even the smallest act of love can create a miracle.